Do you like movies and games also? Listen, so much more they all know. Vice, Pyro, Lotus, and friends. Welcome to Corrective Consciousness.
Welcome to Corrective Consciousness, episode 132, the podcast where we explore the inanity of pop culture. I am your flubbing host, vysethebold, and this is...
Lotus Prince.
And PyroJackFrost.
You know what? It should get easier every week.
I mean, technically, for most normal human beings, it probably should.
Jeez.
Apparently, I don't know how to read.
I'm an asshole.
But yeah, so we are back again here with the OG3, and we are going to cover a topic in which I really wanted to go over because I'm playing a game in a series here that is not like the other games in the series. So this is going to be underrated entries in series we like. And I typically I want to gear the discussion to entries we like that are different. But we can go over some terrible ones as well. But I wanted to go over the inspiration of this one. I'm actually playing SteamWorld Heist right now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I heard a lot about Heist, but you really only hear about the two digs.
Yeah, and I will say that this is actually the third game in the series. The first game in the series is actually even more obscure.
I didn't even know that Dig was the second game in the series.
Yeah, it is. There is a very little known DSiWare SteamWorld tower defense game. It's called SteamWorld Tower Defense. It's still downloadable on the 3DS as of right now. I have not played that game in the series, but the series is well known for SteamWorld Dig, which is a really great game. I really love that game a lot. So I recently bought all three SteamWorld games on the Switch because they were all on sale. I own them all to begin with, but once again, I'm double dipping because I'm much more likely to play them if they're on Switch. So I was a little apprehensive because the type of game that it is, I'm not as into or as passionate about. So it is advertised as a tactical style game, and so whenever I think about that, I think of really crunchy, really technical RPGs such as Final Fantasy Tactics and especially Tactics Ogre. Those games tend to be really good and well loved by their fans, but they are also take a while to get into. They're a little impenetrable, and they also may be dry except for the the actual challenge of playing those games.
Yeah,
and they're typically really hard.
Yeah, and that's what I was like. So for the two that you mentioned, actually, the Tactics Ogre, especially the latest one, I wouldn't say the newest, but the latest one, the one that was on the PSP or whatever.
Sure.
And Final Fantasy Tactics, like the stories, I really, really enjoyed. Like Tactics, I beat, and Final Fantasy Tactics, I beat, and I really, really enjoyed the story. And for Tactics Ogre, the part that I played, I really enjoyed. But kind of what you were saying, Tactics games for me, it's too much. Like, yeah, I like them, but then I get too far in, and the micromanaging I don't want to be a part of.
Yeah, they tend to be. They also tend to have points in the game in which you can there can be a point of no return because you didn't play them the right way, and I hate that. I think that's a really bad game design, and it's also not cognizant of the player's time. Which I think is the most egregious thing because the people that are playing your games are most likely adults, so you should value their time.
Right.
So with those games you can there are and also the Fire Emblem games are like that as well. So they're
the latest ones are a little bit better, but yeah.
Well, yeah, all these games kind of have later entries that are a little bit better at these things, but a lot of the shining examples have those design flaws. At least with Tactics Ogre, the PSP one is a remake of the original game on PS1 and Super Nintendo. So it is made with all the modern conveniences of that time, and they undo a lot of the issues, with the time travel mechanic that they have in that game.
Mhm.
So that's cool too.
Yeah, I
And
was
the
gonna
later
say,
Fire Emblem
like,
games
quick,
are good.
quick tangent interruption. That's
Yeah.
might be a little bit of an unpopular opinion, but I feel like all games should be beatable in at most, like, I'm just gonna throw out a number for the idea of, like, let's say 25 to 30 hours. Like,
Mhm.
all games should be
I think that's
beatable
reasonable.
in 20 to 30 hours,
Wait, you
and
want
then
the original Mario Brothers to be beaten in 25 hours?
or less, 25
Oh!
to 20 to 30 hours or less, with all the extra stuff is optional. Like, all these games that are released now, mainly JRPGs that take forever to play, like, it makes me not want to get it because I don't have the time. But anyway, back to
Well,
SteamWorld
no,
Heist.
no, I can get behind that though, because it does
100% agree.
kind of drive me crazy when games are advertised where it's like, don't worry, like you're not going to be done with it before you know it. This game's like 60 hours long, and it's like, do I want that though?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it took me forever to beat Dark Souls, and that's why I was talking about it for so long, because it took me, 65 hours, something like that, to play that game with the DLC. So it, it's a pain in the ass to have to play a game for that long, as much as you like it. I want to play other games too,
Well, I was gonna say about that, like regarding as much as you like it, because like there are some games like the Yakuza games. This is partly just my personality, but like if you want to just beat the games, you can do it. But the side stuff is what really makes the games stand out. But the side stuff takes forever, and this is especially a problem in Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise because its side stuff is pretty damn grindy, whereas Dark Souls, that's just how long the game is. So like you don't feel like, geez, like I need to get more material so I can pay off this guy. It's like if you feel like upgrading your equipment, then do that, but you don't have to, even though you probably should, but you don't have to.
Yeah. Well, getting back to my my topic, I was a little apprehensive because like SteamWorld Dig 2 is already out and has also gotten really good praise. And in fact, most people say that it's even better than the first one, and I loved the first game. So not only is the sequel in the same style as the original, but I know I'm going to like it. But I decided, you know what, I'm going to play Heist, because even though I'm not as excited, just to give it a shot. And if I didn't like it, I would stop, and then that was that. So I gave it a chance. So I was very pleasantly surprised. So the way that this game plays is that you have a squad of pirates. This takes place in the far future from Dig. Dig takes place in like a Western setting, whereas Heist takes place after the Earth explodes and sends all of the steam bots out into space. Spoiler alert, I guess. And SteamWorld Dig takes place after all of humanity's been wiped out too. So anyway, so this is in the very, very far-flung future. And essentially what happens is the steam bots are all competing for water because they need it to stay alive. Because they're steam bots. So it's kind of funny to have like a futuristic setting where like the the protagonists are outdated technology, which is kind of hilarious. But it's really neat. It takes place on a 2D plane. So the best way to describe this game is it's kind of like a if you had a campaign for a Worms game, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So it's 2D, so it's tactical in the sense that you are moving, a certain amount of steps. You have to plot where your characters are going to be shielded and still be able to shoot at other enemies. And part of the challenge and fun of the game is aiming your weapons in such a way to be able to hit the enemies effectively and also not get hurt in the same process. There are explosive weapons that have friendly fire, for instance. So you really get to know the game's modes and how you need to move and space your characters versus the different types of enemies that are out there, and there are different types of objectives depending on which level that you're trying to do. So you may not need to kill everything. You may actually want to avoid that and just focus all of your efforts on doing certain things. Now, what's cool about this game, I just found it fun because I liked Worms a lot, and so it kind of has that golf aspect to it. Like, you're like, oh man, I hope I make this. I need to like get the angles just right, and it's very satisfying when you do. You can end up getting off critical hits because of it, and equipping new items to your characters and leveling them up is fun. You could also play levels as much as you want if you want to grind, which is really neat. There's a diverse cast of characters too, and you can pick your favorites if that's just what you want to do. But you could also level up everybody else too if you wish. And here's another thing. In each level, you have the opportunity to earn stars, which are like notoriety points in the world. And they allow you to buy certain items later on that, like, like swag hats, essentially, like hats that you could dress up your character in. But that's not a requirement and doesn't affect the ending of the game. So you don't have to play every level perfectly. It's just there if you want to do it, which goes along with our previous comments on if a game respects your time. So I was playing a couple levels over and over again to try to get them perfect because I would lose a crew member or something like that during the run, and you would lose a star if you lose a crew member. And then I found out, I looked it up online. I was like, do I really need to keep trying to do this? And it turns out no. If you just want to move ahead and soldier through and beat the game, go ahead. It's not going to punish you for it.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I liked in cool. Fire Emblem, when they let you turn off permadeath for characters that die. Like, granted, I would probably just reset battles anyway, but it's still a nice feature. And those who use it. Those who don't.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I'm going to continue on and playing this game. I'm in the third hub, which I think may be the last, with the way that it's paced. It feels like it. So I'm happy about that. I'll be able to beat that and move on to another game or SteamWorld Dig 2. So I'm really excited about that. But I'm also excited that I like this game, and that it touched a few of my buttons that I didn't realize it was going to. So anyway, I thought it was a cool entry, and I wanted to talk about it. If anybody has any reservations about it, or maybe even skipped over it because it didn't sound like their cup of tea, to give it a try, because I definitely didn't think I was going to like it as much as I did. So does anybody else have a pick?
Yeah, I have a few. I mean, I'm not going to list all of them right now, but one example I can think of is probably Resident Evil Gaiden. Now, part of this might be underrepresented.
You like a Resident Evil game?
Not at all. Now, like the thing with this is, though, this might be underrepresentation as opposed to underrated. But the thing is, even the people who know about it, I don't think are super fans of Resident Evil Gaiden, and it's certainly not a scary game. And it plays differently from other Resident Evils because it's on the Game Boy Color. But it's a pretty entertaining adventure in its own right. And you're kind of solving this mystery as you're exploring this giant boat you're on. The music is surprisingly good. And you get a pretty diverse weapon loadout. You have infinite inventory size because the game would be like unplayable if you didn't. And there were like legitimate plot twists in there. So it made for a very entertaining experience. And to continue on the horror bandwagon, probably Silent Hill 4, because for a very long time that game was like the black sheep of the series. But again, it does a very
people are coming around on it.
That was like the only one that I played.
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting game because unlike other Silent Hills, it doesn't really push the creepy dread like the original trilogy did. But at the same time, the circumstances that you're in are disturbing. You're locked in to your apartment, and the chains and locks on your door are on the inside. Like, God knows how they got there. You didn't put them there. And you're just locked in, and then this hole appears in your bathroom. you could crawl through it, and you end up in various like otherworld areas, and you meet people and see if you can save them from being murdered by the things that are in the other worlds. Not like an escort mission. It's more like just based on the plot, see if you succeed or not. And you gotta worry about ghosts coming after you, and then as you progress through the game, the hole in your bathroom gets bigger and bigger, and you don't know why it's happening. So, like, it's not scary in that, like, oh no, I can't look at the screen, it's too scary, but, like, thinking about the situation, it's like the whole thing is really disturbing.
Yeah. It's one of those like psychological horror kind of things.
Silent Hill 1 through 3 were psychological horror as well. Like they were all about like the ambience and really fucked up things that could happen. I mean, for little like gotcha jump scare examples, there's stuff like in Silent Hill 2 where you knock on a bathroom stall because the door is closed and you can't open it. And you don't hear a response, and you're like, I guess I just can't open it. And as you're about to leave the bathroom, like you get toward the door, you hear a very loud knock in return, and you're like, what? And like Silent Hill 3 has a room where there's just a big wall-sized mirror, like the wall is a mirror, and when you walk into the room, you can't tell until you try to leave, but the door locks you in. So you're just in this room with this mirror of your, like, you just see your own reflection, and eventually, like, your reflection starts getting more and more, like, corrupted, whereas you aren't, but the room you're in is getting more and more corrupted, and eventually, as you run around, your reflection just kind of stops moving, and you don't, and you're like, I don't understand anything that is happening, and finally, like, just after some time passes, the door just unlocks, and you can leave. And you're like, fuck that room. Like,
wow.
But Silent Hill 4 doesn't have stuff like that, but it's more like the circumstances of the plot are what is really creepy and unsettling about the game. Silent Hill 1 through 3, I mean, the plot's freaky. There's this, terror that's happening to the town or with James with his mind, and there's lots of symbolic references to aspects of your character's personalities and lives, but it's really more like this level is scary, whereas in Silent Hill 4 it's like this whole plot is like the actual scary part. Silent Hill 4 is probably the least scary of the first 4 games, but the plot, if you think about it, is just like, ugh. Like the whole idea behind it is like, what is going on and why? It's really interesting in that sense. Like, you can't leave your apartment, and when you pound on the door, nobody hears you, even though they're standing right outside your door. It's like, that's not video game scary, but that's like, imagine if if that happened to you. Scary. Like,
fucked up.
Yeah, like Silent Hill 1 through 3 are video game scary. I actually think they're the better games, but 4 is still really good in its own way. Like, it's one of those things where Silent Hill 1 through 3 followed a formula. I mean, 2 changed it up in terms of what the town was, but the gameplay followed a formula, and Silent Hill 4 did not follow that formula, so this wasn't a case of the game being bad, it was a case of the game being different. Like, this isn't like the previous 3 games, I don't know about this, but if you give it a chance, it's actually quite good.
Neat. How about you, Pyro?
Well, if we're talking about series that I like, there's one series I like in particular. You may have heard of it. It's called the Shin Megami Tensei series.
I'm not familiar.
But there are a lot of games in this series that are underrated, mainly because it didn't really hit popularity until like Persona 3.
Sure.
But even then, like when Persona 3 was out, there were still some games. So I'm just gonna list a few that I know that I really enjoyed. I want to say like Persona 1 and 2 are underrated, mainly because people forget they exist.
Sure.
There's a whole joke on the Mega 10 Reddit saying that Persona started with the number 3. Like,
well, yeah, it's like Fallout. Like, I thought 3 was the first game.
Right.
Like, I thought Final Fantasy 7 was the first game. Like, what?
Yeah, and Persona 2 is what got me into the series. So I really like that one, but that's an easy one. I also want to say like the Devil Summoner, the 2 Devil Summoner games, not the original one for PlayStation or whatever, Saturn.
Yeah.
But the ones that were on PS2. They were really good games and people really enjoyed them. But,
those games, yeah.
But they are a little underrated just because they don't get that much talk.
They had like action elements, right?
Yeah, so the way that worked was, it was still the whole idea with you collecting demons, but battles took place in this like small, let's say, circular arena with you and one demon, and it was an action. It was an action game where, granted, you were in a small arena. You pressed a button to attack, you pressed a button to defend, you pressed a button to dodge, and your demon did his own moves. And I think you could like command them to do certain things. But it's also really cool because the whole story, both stories were kind of like mysteries, because in the Devil Summoner games, at least for these two, I'd never really played the one on Saturn, but you are a detective. I mean, granted, it's in like the 1920s, but you're a detective, so they're like
Wasn't
these
it
mysteries.
remade for 3DS? I'm sorry.
I don't think there was a Devil Summoner for 3D. Oh, yes, that was a remake of the Saturn game.
Yeah,
the Devil Summoner, but I never played that yet, especially because it's like really expensive now. But
Is it?
The two, yeah, like when I checked on Amazon, it was like $80, $90.
Wow, it must have sold out.
Yeah, but like the two for PlayStation were really good. Another game that I wanted to mention in the series that was really good, and this one I might talk a little bit longer, was, I think it was called Shin Megami Tensei Imagine. It was an MMORPG.
Okay, yeah.
For PlayStation, and like, granted, I am a little into MMOs, but this was I think the second Mega 10 game that I played, if I'm thinking about it correctly, because I got into it with Persona 2, and I was like really, really hungry for more Mega 10 games to play, and there weren't many other games in the series that were in English. And for some reason, somehow I found this MMORPG, and it wasn't actually that bad. Like, granted, I didn't play for that long because it had those usual MMORPG trappings that I didn't want to get involved in, but it was cool because it was a massive multiplayer Mega 10 game. You went around, the spawns were demons, and you could do something to capture them, and they were like your party member, like your partner that you could walk around with. You can teach them skills. You can, it was basically a massive multiplayer Mega 10 game where your character, when you leveled up, you had stats you could put points into. It was really cool how it worked, and I was really upset because I have to think it was a couple months ago. For some reason, I'm like, you know what? I could really go for trying out that game again, and it just doesn't exist anymore. But like, that was a really underrated game, but at the same end, it doesn't exist. So, I mean, if you can find a private server possibly for it, and you're really into like the whole Pokemon, Shin Megami Tensei, collecting monsters to fight with you, like, that's a really fun one. But then the other one that's, like I said, all the Mega 10 games that are not Persona 3, 4, 5, or the 4 spin-offs, or the later, or even like the mainline Mega 10 games, are underrated. The Digital Devil Saga ones, which are basically underrated mainly because they were just basic RPGs. I mean, that game, you were people that basically turned it into demons, and you had 6 party members that you could change when you're out of battle. And the special thing was you could devour enemies, which gave you some bonuses if you were able to kill them by devouring them. But other than that, it was just a typical RPG.
Huh.
But I would say, like, that's one of those games that I recommend if you want to get into Mega 10, but you're not into collecting demons. That's a good starter Mega 10 game, because a typical RPG. It has a really cool story too. It's all the Mega 10 games are based on religion, and this one's based off of Buddhist religion. So the whole idea is that the people you play as are in the afterlife. And I don't want to talk too much because it was 2 games, and if I tell you what the second game is about, that spoils the ending of the first game. But
okay,
it's a really cool idea where you're in the afterlife and you're competing with each other to see who's the strongest. And then whoever's the strongest gets to go into this tower to be reborn in the real world. And that's the whole premise of the first game. And the second game follows from where that leaves off, and it's really good. And from there, I would say going into like the Persona games and whatever. And then the last one, the last Mega 10 game that is underrated, and I talked about this, I think, early on in the podcast, is the one that came out on the Wii U. Fire Emblem. It was like a Fire Emblem spin-off, like crossover.
It had some name that incorporated SMT
it was like
somehow.
Shin Megami Tensei #FE or something like that. And it really has not much to do with either series other than the like each character has their you could call it like a stand or a persona.
Oh, Tokyo Mirage Sessions.
Tokyo
It was,
Mirage Sessions, yes.
SMT backward, and then
Right.
hashtag or sharp or whatever, FE.
And I think it is sharp. I think because it's supposed to be about dancing. So
Oh, okay.
all the characters are like some sort of idol. Like there's one person who's a singer, one person who's a dancer, one person who's like a pop idol, etc. And they all have their personas, but their personas are characters from Fire Emblem.
That's
But it's
so
really
bizarre.
cool because it somehow is able to connect those two games in a way that because they're not really that similar. But it was really fun. Like there are parts of it that got really repetitive and annoying, but it was pretty cool. And I think that like for what they tried, it wasn't that bad. I'd like to see them try doing some more crossovers, whether it's with another Fire Emblem one or some other series. But I'd really like to see like that because it was an interesting idea, I guess, if anything.
I think I would throw in one more game just because, yeah,
Why
Vice
not?
was talking about the series earlier, but Dark Souls 2, I think, is also
Yeah, that's
Like,
true.
another black sheep of its series, and it also happens to be the only Soulsborne game that was not made by Miyazaki. I think Miyazaki might have been working on Bloodborne while someone else took up the reins and did Dark Souls 2, which is really interesting because Dark Souls 3 is a sequel to 1, but I think 2 was supposed to be a sequel to 1 because there are things where it's like if you look into the lore, you can piece together that this particular aspect might have been a thing that happened in the chronology after Dark Souls 1. So I think 2, I don't know if 2 is canon or what, but I'll have to look into that when I play 3. But 2 doesn't quite feel like 1 in terms of level design and map design, because bonfires are now a checkpoint system, like to show how far you've gotten in a dungeon. There are surprisingly few places in the game where you play a dungeon for a while and you finally open some door that makes a shortcut. Usually you advance, you get a bonfire. You advance, you get a bonfire. So the level design is more basic in that regard.
And
Well,
weren't
not-
like enemies limited spawns too? Like if you kill an enemy too many times, it does not come back.
Yeah, if you kill the same enemy 13 times, like if you kill it and use a bonfire to respawn everybody, and if you kill them again, I think after 13 times they don't come back. There are items that you can grind for called bonfire aesthetics, where you can use that in a bonfire and it'll bring everybody back, but it raises the difficulty of that particular area. Like this one bonfire's zone is like it's now New Game Plus difficulty, and if you do it again, it's New Game Plus 2 difficulty. So use with caution. Now that actually made me really nervous about playing the game because I'm like, I don't like the idea of having limited enemies in Dark Souls because I need the grind stuff, but it takes a long ass time to actually do like a complete like kill everybody permanently
Right.
run. Like it's more effort than it's worth, honestly. So
Yeah.
there are enough enemies for you, and if you really want to use a bonfire aesthetic, you can. Also, there's a particular covenant you can join, which, by the way, if you're starting the game for the first time, don't. But it's the Covenant of Champions. If you join it, then all bonfires, or not all bonfires, but all enemies will respawn infinitely, like it's Dark Souls 1. But all bonfires level up 3 times. So if you just start the game right now,
Oh,
you've
it
been
makes it
playing-
like
you've-
really difficult.
yeah, you've been playing for like 20 minutes. If you join this covenant, and to be fair, it does give you like, are you sure this is hard mode? Are you sure? So the game does tell you. But if you insist on joining the covenant, then the entire game is New Game Plus 3 difficulty, and enemies will
Jesus.
respawn forever. So it's like, nope, no, thank you.
I would
What's
say
interesting though,
Demon Souls
Yeah?
is a little bit of an underrated entry in that series too, because people don't really talk about it that much anymore.
Demons is underrated compared to Dark, yes. And Dark is better in a lot of respects. Again, in terms of level design, like Demon Souls has that cool wrap around level design,
Yeah.
but the worlds are isolated. Like you must go back to the hub worlds to go from World 1 to World 2, whereas in Dark Souls, with few exceptions, you can walk everywhere. So Dark Souls is more of like, it feels like a real world, as opposed to Demon Souls, which feels like 5 very well designed levels. But what I was going to say was interesting about Dark Souls 2, though, is that you can actually respawn bosses.
Really?
If they're close enough to a bonfire, because not all bosses are, but you can actually respawn a lot of bosses in the game. So like Dark Souls 1, a lot of what made it, like if you want to platinum the game, you absolutely must play that game at a bare minimum of 2.5 times, because there's one boss in the game which its soul can turn into 3 different weapons. Well,
that's such a pain in the ass. That was a dick
yeah, that
move.
one fucking guy. Dark Souls 2, to platinum the game, weapons are irrelevant, actually. You don't have to get all the boss weapons. But if you want them anyway, some bosses you can just respawn. They will go up a level in difficulty, but you can just get their souls as many times as you want. So that's kind of nice. And by the way, like Dark Souls 1, New Game plus 8 is, I think, as high as it goes, because, like, eventually you hit max level. Like, you can't go higher. So, like, it'd be unfair if the game just kept going infinitely until it's, like, effectively unbeatable. Not literally, but effectively unbeatable.
Sure.
So New Game plus 8 is as high as it gets. But Dark Souls 2 does have a lot of really interesting character quests, like Dark Souls 1 did, where you get to see their stories play out if you know how to follow them. The DLC levels are really cool, actually. In Dark Souls 1, there's 1 DLC. In Dark Souls 2, there are 3. The one in Dark Souls 1, it plays just like another level, but with some new enemies. But it's like the big reveal of that DLC is when you realize the significance of where you are. Whereas in Dark Souls 2, there are completely new areas that, like, you've never seen architecture or anything like this before, or enemies like this before. And they each have their own gimmick that makes them stand out from the original game. And regarding what I said about there being very little discover that this was a shortcut all along in Dark Souls 2, the old Iron King DLC, I feel, is a brilliantly designed level in this regard, because you're on this tower, and after you play through a bunch of it, you like find a way to activate the tower, so all of a sudden all the elevators work. So now shortcuts kind of exist, and also new areas are accessible. So that level is super clever. And in like the ice DLC, there are a lot of chests and doorways that are frozen over, and if you eventually find a way to thaw those areas, now you have reason to go back, and also there are new areas you can go to. And the bosses, people complain about the bosses in Dark Souls 2, because a lot of the bosses in Dark Souls 2 are just bigger knights, whereas Dark Souls 1 had those, but
it also had some more
giant
creative bosses also.
Yeah, it had a bunch of dragons. It had that giant skeleton made up of a bunch of mini skeletons. It had some, like, really, like, the Gaping Dragon was insanely cool, that design. Dark Souls 2 does have a lot of big knights, but I think people are forgetting when it does get the really crazy designs out. The Flexile Sentry is really cool. There are some dragon bosses. There's a really cool witch boss. There's a crazy giant spider-looking boss. Like, there's definitely creativity going on in the character design department as well. It's just really easy to remember some early bosses, where it's like the Dragon Rider and the Dragon Lancer. They're big knights. Yup, but like there is some variety going on. So, like, give that game another shot. It's quite good. Again, I still have to play Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne. I mean, I know a lot about Bloodborne, but I know, like, nothing about 3. I know people talk about Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne more than 2, but, like, give 2 a chance. It might actually be the best entry to start the series with, because it's
more
own thing.
beginner-friendly.
Yeah, it's its own thing. Level design is not simple. A lot of areas are really large rooms you need to navigate, and enemy placement makes them difficult, but level designs are generally more linear, and you have a big checkpoint system going on with bonfires, and bonfires also repair your equipment, which is quite convenient. I forgot to mention this, but your equipment is a lot less durable in 2 than it is in 1, so, like, frequent bonfire placement is a lifesaver, because, like, You'll find your weapons on the verge of breaking sooner than you think if you try just like skipping some bonfires. But Dark Souls 2 is surprisingly user-friendly, even though I thought it would be the exact opposite with the enemies that stop respawning eventually. So it's an interesting look.
Yeah, definitely. So, the only other thing that I wanted to mention on my end is I wanted to do a shout out to BioShock 2.
That's a good point.
That tends to be the most overlooked game in the series. The series is getting a lot of flack lately of people criticizing a once highly touted series. I think there's some kind of weird internet cycle where people go through love, hate, and then love again.
It's like the Final Fantasy series, every single game.
Yeah. I mean, I don't get it. I think that
FF8's another contender. Speaking of which,
I think it'll come back around again to like people loving these games again, but there's a lot of hate on BioShock Infinite for some stupid reason. It was a great game when it came out. It's still
Infinite's plot I thought was brilliant, and its ending was one of the more poignant endings I've seen in a video game. BioShock 2, this is kind of unfair because this relies on my previous gameplay experience to talk about. People fucking love the first BioShock.
Yeah.
They loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a great game. But I liked BioShock 2 more for one reason. I already played BioShock 1 in 1999 when it was called System Shock 2.
Yeah.
Like, I know people say, oh, it's different though. You got the Little Sisters and it's got that whole Ayn Rand vibe. Yeah, you're right. But I was able to call the plot twist because I'd played System Shock 2.
Yeah.
Like, it follows System Shock 2 way too closely. Like, I already know what's going to happen in this game. The design is fucking beautiful. The bosses are brilliant, especially that one artist guy. That guy's the best.
Yeah.
But, like...
LaFontaine.
There we go. I already played BioShock 1, like, a decade earlier. So I played BioShock 2. I'm like, wow, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm already into it.
Well, outside of that, I love the first and third games a lot as well, but yeah. I think 2 never gets talked about, and it's kind of the black sheep in the series because Ken Levine wasn't the director of the second one, so people automatically don't count it as as important as the other ones. It's kind of like with Dark Souls 2, right?
Yeah.
But this one has unique gameplay compared to the rest of the series.
Mm-hmm.
It actually has a lot of tower defense mechanics, and I am not a tower defense fan in the slightest. I don't like those types of games.
Oh, you mean when you have to, like, watch the Little Sisters harvesting?
Exactly.
Those were actually, like, my least favorite part of the game.
I actually love that part of the game. You have to defend the Little Sister while they're harvesting Adam, and the game, the weapons that you have at your disposal in the second one are very trap based, as opposed to just the regular guns, and they increasingly get a lot really fun to use in order to protect the Little Sisters. You have to do increasingly more challenging scenarios, but with cooler, neater and weapons and more versatile weapons. So it's a lot of fun, and not only that, but the DLC is one of the best pieces of DLC that has ever been made. It is one of the best written DLC chapters of any game that I've ever played. It's really, really good. It's called Minerva's Den.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, so I really recommend going back to that game. Play the games in order. Don't skip over 2 because some people don't think it's as important. Because I think the gameplay mechanics are super fun.
The combat system is better than Infinite's. Like, I mean, Infinite wasn't bad, but BioShock 2's combat system really stands out.
It's really
and by the
good.
way, speaking of what you were saying with the increasingly cool and versatile weapons, there's a really cool system in that game, like the camera, where you're supposed to take pictures of X amount of enemies, and you're supposed to, like, I think to help level up your weapons, you're supposed to, like, you need to shock the enemy before killing them, or, like, do different things with different weapons. Like, the game...
There's a lot of limitations, yeah.
Yeah, like, the game encourages you to use your various items in your arsenal to fight enemies to like level up certain aspects of them. It's kind of like again, I'm making a weird comparison here, but this is like Alice Madness Returns. You have 4 basic weapon types, but they also have practical uses as opposed to combat. Like, if you want to blow open this wall, you'll need to use this particular weapon. Or, like, some enemies have shields. You'll need to use this weapon to fight them. So, like, the game really kind of makes you use all 4 weapons. Whereas in American McGee's Alice, you have 10 weapons, and you can really beat the entire game just using your favorite one. You know, like, but Bioshock 2 and Alice Madness Returns really encourage you to use, well, in Alice Madness Returns it's mandatory, but in Bioshock 2 you are highly encouraged to use your entire loadout, which I appreciate. It's kind of like Ratchet and Clank. Like, I have my favorite weapon, but I want to level up this one just to see what happens, so I'll use, like, weird stuff I might not otherwise use.
Okay. Any final bits here before we move on to the regular segments?
No, I think like really it's just. I mean, nowadays the only series that I really play is Final Fantasy and Mega 10, and there aren't really that many underrated games in Final Fantasy. I mean, there are, but not that are necessarily ones I'd want to talk about. So
most of the underrated ones are underrated for a reason.
Yeah,
I would
a
say
lot of the
like,
side games are underrated.
Well, I mentioned this before, but like FF8, like, and I understand why, but it's still cool.
Well, Lotus, you're the best looking man here.
Oh yeah, that stupid pixely face.
It's just blocks.
Yeah, it's like, all right,
recognizable face.
Best looking. Yeah, like I hate to see the other guys.
So, I'll first go into Vice's weigh-in here. Last week I did not weigh myself, but I weighed myself like right after, like the next day, and I found I had gained quite a bit during the holidays. So I had gotten up to 259. But I had scaled back, and when I weighed myself this week, I got down to 258. So, yeah, I mean, I was doing well for a while, and then I fell off the wagon, which is not good. So, luckily, I told myself, you know what, don't be, complacent. So I did end up losing a pound since last week. So, as much as I gained, I lost. So. I want to get back on the horse here and get back going. I have to say sorry to myself most of all, because this is a hard thing for me. Maybe, I hope this gets across that this isn't an easy thing for me. So, luckily by doing this every week, it helps me stay on task. So, I'm hoping that I can lose 2 pounds this week, and I'd be very, very happy. So, can we go into some fan reactions here, and then fan questions?
We didn't really seem to have any reactions regarding the topics discussed, but we do have a question.
There we
go.
So,
this one's from Fakafon. What game mechanic, because he had asked about game mechanics before, like what game mechanics are baffling. This one was, what game mechanic do you know of that never made it into a game? So he's thinking something like Kojima, who wanted to write a password directly onto a game disc, which once hot would be physically displayed. Wasn't that going to be for Snatcher, for like the MSX or whatever, like you heat the disc?
So I can point to one. Maybe this wasn't an official thing, or maybe it was at some point, but I remember the Bungie devs talking about a lot of things that they wanted to do with Halo 2, and almost none of them happened. It ended up being like a straight up shooter, but they were thinking about adding strategy elements, like with hopping on pelicans and things like that, and doing strategic drops and things like that. And I always thought that was really cool in my high school brain. But now, more and more I think about it, it's better that they kind of just focused the game and made it even more of a focus shooter than that, and focused on the multiplayer and things like that, which really I mean, Halo 2 was a landmark game when it came out. It is the reason today why we have such good multiplayer on consoles as we do right now. So I'm glad it happened like that, but I always thought it would have been cool in order to kind of get like a varied gameplay style. But that game ended up being a deathmatch game with a campaign, which is, it was good at doing that. But it's always cool to see something a little bit different. And if it had done that, it wouldn't have been nearly as popular. But I would have liked to have seen something that did something like that, eventually. Anybody else have any thoughts?
Well,
on
just
that?
to continue, Fakafan also had one more thing he wanted to mention, which was he remembers reading that someone wanted to make a beat 'em up where hitting enemies with the music's rhythm would make your attacks stronger. And he says he thinks that mechanic was dropped due to its complexity and because slower music would make your optimal play less fast. Despite that, I don't know if this quite is the same thing. Maybe it even is, but I think in MagFest, one of the indie developers had a beat 'em up that was to some kind of musical rhythm. So who knows? Maybe it's happening.
I think that that would be difficult in a multiplayer aspect. Might be difficult, but because if you have a beat 'em up with multiple people playing, that kind of thing might be a little difficult to implement. But
yeah, I don't know. I can think of a couple that were this is things that actually were implemented, and then the developers were like, nah, so they're like demo disc only. One of them, and they're both from the same company actually. One of them is, I think I mentioned this before, Ico, where Ico is all about solving puzzles and platforming, and you're escorting the girl Yorda with you as far as you can go. But you are more spry than she is, so you can make jumps she can't. So there are cases where you have to wait at the edge of a ledge, and she jumps and doesn't quite make it, and you catch her and you pull her up. But in the demo, they made it so you had to hold down whatever your grab button was to maintain hold on her, and if you let go, she would just drop to her death. And they removed that in part because it's morbid, and also because
it sounds really obnoxious.
Yeah, it's just obnoxious. Just do the game. So in the full game, you just catch her, that's it. And in Shadow of the Colossus, you have a sword. You're supposed to climb up on the various colossi and then stab their glyphs. But in the demo disc, you could swing the sword while you're riding on your horse, and that was removed because it is 100% pointless. I honestly don't know how you would do anything with that in the game based on what you're supposed to be doing. I cannot imagine where you would swing your sword and actually hit something. So that's just not in the game.
Yeah, I was actually part of this question. I from the top of my head cannot think of any mechanics that I know that didn't make it into games, but I feel like this is also a nice part of this question is mechanics that did make it into games that probably shouldn't have, just escort missions entirely.
Yeah, just anyone. Well, that is one thing BioShock Infinite did right. It's an escort mission as far as plot is concerned, but Elizabeth is never in any danger based on gameplay, so just play the game, don't worry about it, it's fine. That's escort done right. The worst is Natalia in GoldenEye, where there's a whole level based around her not dying while she's standing still at a computer and everyone's shooting at you from every direction. James, could you quiet down? I'm trying to work. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Never mind the 10 guys with machine guns. I guess I'll be quiet. Sorry.
That's funny.
This isn't quite a gameplay mechanic, but Resident Evil 4, I believe, had a the knife, I think, was in your inventory, as opposed to it's just a dedicated button on the GameCube controller.
Yeah, I remember that. How about you, Pyro? Do you know of anything maybe in any of the games you played that had content removed or didn't have enough time for, that kind of thing?
No, like I said before, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of demos that I've played, but it seems like a lot of that stuff did make it in.
I think I could think of a big one. KOTOR 2, Knights of the Old Republic 2, had a lot of like ending stuff that never made it into the game. And fans like data mined the game as well as talk to the developers and things like that, and added it back in.
Man!
So it was really really cool. Apparently, with the cut content, it is one of the best video gaming narrative experiences ever. It's really really good.
If we're including cut content, well, actually, were you gonna say something more about KOTOR?
Oh no, I was just gonna say that if you are going to play that game, don't go for the vanilla experience because you're doing yourself a disjustice.
Okay.
Apparently, the way to play it, according to everybody, is with that content included.
Well, yeah. If we're talking cut content, then going right back to Demon's Souls, if you're in the Nexus, there are 5 worlds you can select, and there are all these giant like monolith-looking sort of stones that you can approach, but there's one 6th stone that's broken, and it shows up if you look at like the world tendency, like light and dark tendency map. It's called something like the World of the Giants. I think that was just a shout out to content that the developers weren't able to implement with the time they had allotted. And the Tomb of the Giants in Dark Souls might be like a wink at the World of the Giants that we never got in Demon's Souls. Also regarding cut content, I had something but I lost it, so maybe I'll come back to it. But the Demon's Souls thing particularly stands out. Oh no, I got one. This is kind of funny because this was an entire game that was never made. The Nipponichi people, like with Disgaea and La Pucelle and Makai Kingdom, they were going to make just a different video game, and they never did. So sort of a running gag in a lot of these, especially the older Nipponichi games. I don't know about the newer ones, maybe they still do it, but you can often unlock as secret characters post-game previously playable characters in older games. Like Laharl, the main character of Disgaea, is available as like a secret unlockable character in a lot of the sequels, and like Makai Kingdom and stuff. Prie from La Pucelle is unlockable even in the first Disgaea. Stuff like that. You can play as previous characters in a lot of these games. But one unlockable character, I forgot where she came from. Like maybe like Disgaea 2 or 3 or something. Maybe 2, it was on PS2. It was like Disgaea 2 or Makai Kingdom maybe. There's this one, this girl named Asagi, and like we don't know who she is. And if you look her up, like in the game, in the character description, it says that she was going to be the main character of this game that like was never made. So like she's just bitter about how she doesn't have a game. So she's unlockable in a bunch of the Nipponichi games, and it's just like, I don't quite know who you are, except that you're the person who no one knows who they are. Like that is her identity. Also, even in Dark Souls 1, if you go in the painted world of Ariamis, the boss is crossbreed Priscilla, that dragon-human hybrid. She's kind of a wink too. If you look at the doll that unlocks the painted world of Ariamis, it talks about like this other world and this person was like rejected or whatever. There's sort of an in-joke with that. Dark Souls was originally going to have a particular main character. Like in Lost Kingdoms, you don't customize a character, you're playing as this princess. Like that's just who you are. Well, Priscilla was going to be the Dark Souls protagonist, which actually does make sense. Dark Souls is all about this world post-war between humans and dragons, and Crossbreed Priscilla, is a crossbreed of these. So she was going to be the main character, but then they were like, nah, let's make it more like Demon's Souls, where you're a custom character. So you can meet Priscilla as a possible boss fight. So that's not exactly cut content. That's more like the entire game's redesign. But like, there you go.
That's interesting.
Cool. Yeah.
Well, I think that's really good. Some really good mentions there. I do want to make an appeal to our audience here to please continue to submit questions, because
we only have 3 left.
Yeah, we're running low on them, and we really need some more in the queue. So even if you have a couple questions in mind, please drop them down in the comments on YouTube and SoundCloud. We really need your help in order to continue moving forward with the show here. So Any last words before we wrap things up, gentlemen?
No siree.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm probably good.
Okay, well, that's the show for this week. We want to thank all of our fans who contributed questions. Please continue to. Please keep us supplied with awesome topics by submitting questions of your own via the YouTube and SoundCloud pages. While there, please give us thumbs ups, likes, and 5-star ratings on iTunes. It helps promote and spread awareness of the show, and any bit of encouragement helps keep the show going. You can also catch us on Tuesdays on our sister podcast, Corrective Consciousness, the in-depth look at this week in our lives. Finally, you can friend me as vysethebold on Steam, PSN, Xbox Live, Twitter, Switch, and Battle.net.
And you can follow me on my YouTube channel, Lotus Prince. You can hit me up on Twitter at Lotus Prince. And finally, if you are interested in seeing my videos early, getting in on exclusive live streams, selecting upcoming games for me to Let's Play, currently working on Binary Domain, radical game, or getting conversations with me on Discord with other patrons, then perhaps consider swinging by my Patreon account, which can be found at patreon.com/LotusPrince.
And you can find me on most video game social media outlets as PyroJackFrost or Cloud08540.
And that's the show for this week. We'll catch you next time on Tuesday.
Until next time, everyone.
Peace out, everyone.